to assist the public sector in various countries to preserve those forests. Okay, now that is the extent of our discussion on forests. I want to share with you a personal story to show how contentious private forests, forget about public forests. We all know about what happened with regard to the renovation of our sports facility up at Memorial Stadium, right? Do you know how long that was actually delayed?
3 years.
3 full years. And why was it delayed for 3 full years?
There's an Indian burial site or something.
Yep.
I believe it was underneath these oak trees, and so people
Yes.
wanted that preserved. So as a means of protest, they got up in the trees,
And
stayed up in the trees,
lived in the trees.
lived in
Yep.
the trees.
Right.
I've seen pictures of
Right.
bringing them.
Right.
Lunchables.
In contrast to pepper spray at UC Davis, Berkeley was very cautious about how to deal with these people in the trees. And they let them stay there for 3 years. Anyway, they ultimately, through court action, ultimately got corrected. The cost?
Is it half a billion? It is.
Yes. No, well, I don't know how much it increased, but I know the original estimate was 130 million. So I'm sure it's not the full delta of half a billion less 130, but that was the original estimate of the renovation cost. Okay. This personal story about forests is in 1998. 4 faculty members on the Berkeley campus, myself, a fellow from the law school, another fellow from Haas, another fellow from the economics department. We had started this company in the late 80s after I came back from Washington, D.C., and we grew the company very rapidly, and we took it public. And once it went public, I suddenly had enough resources so I could consider buying a private forest, right? Because I don't want to represent to you that I was concerned about protecting the positive externalities. I was more concerned about private use of this forest. So do you all know where Occidental is? Okay, it's a beautiful area. And there was this extraordinary forest that's set about 2 miles from Occidental, and right at the border of the property, there was this huge waterfall. And it was extraordinary. And I had looked at the property, spent a fair amount of time evaluating it, and decided that it was worth considering making an offer for the property. So I hired this very aggressive female lawyer to work with me on trying to orchestrate a transaction, the benefit of the bargain, right? And it turned out the owner of this land, who had it for sale, there was a logger who actually had an option to buy the property. So right away, if I'm going to close the transaction, I've got to deal with this logger who has an option to buy the property, right? So at the time, I was dean of the College of Natural Resources, and my lawyer exchanged emails with this logger who had an option on the property. And it turned out that he wanted to exercise his option for one purpose and one purpose alone, to harvest the forest, to harvest the timber in the forest, which wasn't the same as my particular interest. But in my lawyer's negotiation with him, there was an exchange of letters. In those days, it was letters. It wasn't email traffic. And I met with him once briefly, and as soon as I met with him, I realized there was no alignment of incentives. It wasn't going to work. But this fellow goes to the local newspaper and explains to the local newspaper that the transaction is about to happen, and the general public shouldn't be concerned about this because he was a partner with somebody who was dean of the College of Natural Resources at Berkeley. And suddenly, it turns out there was a lot of popular press about how in the world could this person, who presumably cares about conservation and preserving natural resources, would enter into an agreement with a logger to destroy this extraordinary forest. And to make matters worse, the leader of the local group, who turned out to be the wife of one of the Grateful Dead stars, by the name of Garcia. We all know who he is, right? This story gets worse and worse. So at this point, I call off my lawyer and says, listen, we're not dealing with this fellow at all. And suddenly a Daily Cal, is the Daily Cal closed at this point, or is it still operating? Right now, right this moment. Yes. In any event, the Daily Cal has a front page article in which Garcia's former wife, he at that point had passed away a couple of years prior to that, made all these representations of how I was going to destroy the landscape, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it appears in the Daily Cal. I come back to my office, the dean's office in the College of Natural Resources, and my assistant, a wonderful woman, says, you're not going to believe this, but there are 50 people from Occidental are out marching around Union Hall. And moreover, they're passing flyers all over the campus. And it's got your name all over these flyers. And I said, oh my gosh, there's nothing happening here. I was attracted to the property, nothing has happened. So they're marching outside of Union Hall. So what do you do in these circumstances? You put everything on the table. You try to create total transparency. I call them all into my office, and they're standing around the room, all standing there, and we go through this long debate. And she happens to be there. I remember her distinctly because she did most of the talking. Very little of the listening, but most of the talking. But in any event, we go through the whole process, and I explain what my purpose was. I certainly wasn't a partner with this particular logger. But these people, if they had the opportunity, they would have excluded and ostracized this logger forever from this community if they could. Okay, so the story ends up in a very positive way. After I convince them, they themselves go out and start picking up all these flyers. They went around campus trying to pick them all up, and moreover, then wrote a number of letters to the editor of the Santa Rosa Democrat and to the Daily Cal as well. But the purpose for this story, sharing the story with you, is that private forests, as well as public forests, are very contentious. And anyone who attempts to get involved in private ownership today of private forest is faced with serious obstacles with regard to how that forest is managed, and they might as well be public forest. That's the direction in which society is going, and the sooner we get there, the better off we all will be. Okay, so that's my personal story about forests. Yes?
What forest?
Occidental. Which forest?
Yeah.
I can give you the street and the track number. It's not named a specific forest.
Occidental College or Occidental up here?
No, Occidental up here, not Occidental College. The little town of Occidental. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to fisheries. And now we're going to return to common property resources. And to give you an overview, and this is in your readings for today, which give you an evolution of a particular species in the North Sea, namely a herring. And this particular source of protein was the major source for poor people throughout Scandinavia and Europe. It was a staple food in Scandinavia. In 1963, the stock of herring in the North Sea was approximately 2 million metric tons. Right? And only 8 vessels were fishing for herring. And as a result, it was highly profitable for each of those 8 vessels, which were individually controlled by different firms. In 1964, because of the open access of this fishery, suddenly, because the egg boats were highly profitable and there were no entry barriers, suddenly there was a large number of boats that were out there fishing for herring, and they all remained profitable. 4 years later, there was now 352 vessels. Open access, right? No entry barriers. And with that large number of vessels, the stock fell from the 2 million metric tons. It fell all the way down to 166,000, and it was no longer profitable. And now you have vessels or fishers who are exiting the industry. And then in the late 1970s, the Norwegian government stepped in, along with the European Union, and closed the fishery. So this is a story explaining the basic facts. Because this is an open access, common property resource, it's subject to the tragedy of commons. Right? And that's exactly what happened here, and that was the reason that the public sector ultimately stepped in and closed the fishery. So given that factual pattern, what are the basic principles that we have studied throughout the course that can be applied to effectively managing these common property resources? And the kind of questions we want to look at here is, what is the Schaefer model? What does it help us do with regard to determining the optimal, most efficient management of such resources? What is a static, efficient, sustainable yield? How does open access to the fishery result in inefficient yields from the available stock? What are the public policy options for achieving efficient allocation within those fisheries? And what are the pros and cons of each respective policy? Now, we'll be talking about policies that have been implemented in various parts of the world, not just here in the United States. Okay, first, let's look at the Schaefer model. It's a biological model. All it does is tell us what is the relationship between the stock of fish and its yield. It hypothesizes an average relationship between the size of the fish population, with regard to whatever species, and the growth of that fish population. So in the figure here, we'll see that in looking at the relationship between the stock and the rate of change or growth in the fish population, that there are stable equilibriums, in which there is no incentive to move away from that point on the part of the fish. Right? We're not talking about economic incentives now. And there are other points on this particular graph that are unstable. Let's look at this. Okay, this is the Schaefer basic relationship for fish. We've got here on the horizontal axis the stock of fish. Right? On the vertical axis is the growth in the fish stock. Fish breed. Fish reproduce. They're a renewable resource. And if there are too few of them, they're not going to generate additional offspring. Right? If there are too many of them, there won't be sufficient nutrients within their habitat to, in effect, continue to reproduce and grow the amount of stock. Now, the two stable equilibrium is at 0. There's no fish stock at 0, right? And that's certainly sustainable at 0, because there will be no growth at 0. And over here at S bar, that is the carrying capacity of a particular fishery. And that carrying capacity basically says when I get to that point, the death of the fish is simply going to be offset by the new or growth in fish. Right? So those are the two biologically stable equilibrium, and then anything between those 2 points is, of course, achievable. And right here, this S, as I noted in the prior slide, this S lower bar is, in fact, not an equilibrium. And the reason it's not an equilibrium is because at that particular point, you will only find out that if the fish effectively reproduce, you can begin to move out the Schaefer biological growth curve, or if it turns out there's some external event and a sufficient number of fish perish, then you're going to end up back at 0. But you're certainly not going to stay at this particular point. Okay? So that biological relationship constrains any economic policies that we might want to introduce to effectively manage the fishery. Okay. The efficient sustainable yield is the catch that produces the largest annual net benefits. And that will be the point at which marginal benefits are equal to marginal cost. It has a familiar ring to it, right? And let's prepare a new graph off that biological curve, making some simplifying assumptions. Let's suppose the price of fish is constant. Let's suppose, in addition, that the marginal cost of a unit of fishing effort is also constant. And the third assumption we're going to make is that the amount of fish caught per unit of effort is proportional to the size of the fish population. Okay? All reasonable, but nevertheless simplifying assumptions. Now, under those three assumptions, this is the relevant graph. Okay? So here, what I've done is, since the cost is constant, my cost curve is going to be linear, right? And likewise, the price at which I can sell the fish that are caught is going to be constant, but this curve is going to reflect Schaefer's biological growth curve. And the optimal point is going to be where marginal revenues, which are off this, or marginal benefits, which are off this particular function, is equal to marginal cost, and that's going to occur at effort cap E superscript E. Can't see that. Can you see that? That's a superscript E. Yes?
So this is basically the graphical representation of marginal benefits equaling marginal cost.
That's right. That's all it is. I hate it when people make something that I've prepared so simple. I thought it was insightful, but that's all it is. There's nothing more there. Okay, but there are a few other things going on here, which we're going to use as a basis to show that if you have an open access fishery, you're never going to stop here. You're never going to stop at the point at which marginal benefits are equal to marginal cost. Let's see why. Okay? First, the efficient sustainable yield, as I already indicated, is this cap E superscript little e, and that particular solution maximizes the net benefit, right? Because the incremental costs are going to be equal to the incremental revenues. Any efforts beyond that point are inefficient because the marginal cost, coming back here to the graph, the marginal cost for any effort beyond this particular point all the way out to EC, you're going to be faced with incremental costs that exceed the incremental benefits. Right? And E superscript M, that is the maximum sustainable yield, right? That's the point at which the curve adjusted for the biological curve adjusted for constant prices is the benefit curve. And for that benefit curve, you will achieve the maximum sustainable level at which that particular function is maximum. Right? And the maximum sustainable yield is greater than the economic efficient yield. Right? The one particular point on that graph that we're particularly interested in is the E superscript C, which we'll come back to in a moment. Let me just come back here for a second. We want to pay particular attention to this result here. Keep this in mind, at that particular point, E superscript C, there are no scarcity rents that are being captured. And we talked about scarcity rents on a number of occasions, but here I think you'll see in a very clear way what scarcity rents are. Remember, scarcity rents have to be some positive economic profit has to exist. And it turns out that at this particular outcome, you'll see that the average benefits are equal to average total cost, and there is, as a result, no economic profits or no scarcity rents. Okay? Let's move on. But just keep that in mind. Okay, now, there is one way, right away, of solving the open access problem, namely, as Coase would suggest, give the ownership of the fishery to a private party. Now, a private party who is pursuing their own self-interest will end up at the efficient solution, namely the solution at which marginal benefits are equal to marginal cost, because that is the outcome that maximizes that owner's private profits. But it turns out that certainly we're not going to give private ownership to the ocean, right? That's not going to happen. And as a result, it is, by its very nature, an open access resource. And to the extent that it's open access and there isn't effective regulations limiting the access, no fisherwoman can keep others from exploiting the fishery. And under those circumstances, open access will result in E superscript C, namely the complete dissipation of any scarcity rents. Okay? Let's look at the graph that illustrates this outcome. Okay? What I have in the top panel here is the total revenues or costs, as we had before. This is the fishing effort. And here we have, once again, the total revenues, or total benefits, and the total cost. In the bottom panel, what we have is for the different levels of fishing effort, each of those different levels is a solution to a particular problem. In one case, clearly, for the efficient outcome, cap E superscript little e, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost right at this particular point here, right? But at that point, note that as we move away from that point to the point of maximum yield reflected on this particular curve, E superscript M, that as we move away, there's still scarcity rents that are being generated. And by that I mean the average revenue is above the average total cost. Right? So as long as new fishing vessels can enter this fishery and make some positive economic profits or capture some scarcity rents, they're going to continue to enter. Right? And they will continue to enter until those scarcity rents are completely dissipated. And that will happen right at this point, namely the point at which average revenue is equal to marginal cost, which in turn, because marginal cost is constant, is going to be equal to the average total cost. Right? And at that particular amount of effort, there will be clearly non-efficient fishing going on. Okay? Let's take a concrete example. This is a factually correct story, namely whale hunting was until 1973 unregulated. It was totally open access. And initially, the open access stock level was estimated, depending on the year that the estimate was done, was somewhere between 10,000 and 41,000 whales. The open access annual catch turned out to be about 1,700 whales. And then in 1973, the industry became regulated, and the stock level then increased dramatically because there was limits that were imposed on various vessels with regard to accessing those whales. Now, here's the question. Why did open access cause substantial depletion of the stock, but not its extinction? And this comes back to the second bullet on this particular slide, namely that the stock level was dramatically below the stock level, but still it wasn't extinct. So the question is why? If you have open access, you presume that they will over-whale or over-capture the whales and end up with zero whales that are available as the stock that is available for capture in this ocean, in the ocean. Okay? Give it some thought. Talk to your neighbor. Let's see what the answer is.
Fishermen searching for one of 52,000 versus searching for one of 10,000. The cost of the market is higher, less depleted, and exceeds the benefit.